Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you my October wrap-up. In the month of October I read 14 books. I did Gothtober and all of my books managed to fit into the prompts, and I'm very excited to tell you about them because I found some new favourites. I'll leave content warnings in the description box down below, but without further ado, let's get right down to the books. So the very first book that I want to start with is the first book that I read that month, and that is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is a big boy, it's an epic fantasy, and it follows this traveller who goes into an inn, and he is a very powerful, very well-known traveller, and he is going to tell his story from beginning to end. So this is the first book in a fantasy trilogy that has been incomplete for a very long time, which I think is worth knowing before you go in. But it's full of things that I typically don't enjoy in books, and yet I absolutely loved it. I give it 5 stars and it became a new favourite. I think what I really liked about this book was the main character and just following him and seeing his life. There's magic involved in this, and the way the magic is described to you is you gradually build an understanding of it, you gradually see him honing and learning his skills, but he does not only focus on building his magic skills, he's trying to improve his skills of understanding different people and also in just different elements and different things that he can do. So it was just kind of fascinating to see that, and I would say that a large portion of this book is set in place at a school where he's kind of learning his system but also trying to fit in as one of the youngest and poorest members of this university. And so it's basically a training montage, the whole thing. It's also a prologue because I was waiting for a big plot twist at the end and it doesn't come, but it does give a sense that there's going to be so much more in the second book. It's also one of those books where the main character is just always so genuine, and the main character is not always right, he's not always wrong. He is just trying his best to be a good friend, to be the best in his field and in the studies that he's pursuing, but also to just be happy and be satisfied with what he's got in life. And I think the way that he was so curious and so genuine made me really like him as a character. And there are female characters in this book, and there is a love interest, or who I believe will be the love interest from the hints that we've been given. And I do think the portrayal of women in this one is better than in a lot of other epic fantasy books that I have seen. It's still not the best because women are kind of put into the roles that they can fill in this kind of historical fantasy setting, but it's still done, I think, better than sometimes this book gets credit for. It's really hard to talk about this one and give it a solid review because mostly it's told in flashback, it just does things and I just love it. I don't really have a deep explanation for why I adored this book, and I promise you if I knew why I adored this book as much as I did, I would tell you. But mostly I just had a good time and I flew through an over 500-page book, which so rarely happens, that I cannot wait to get my hands on the sequel and just to continue reading this book even if it does not have an ending yet. It was just a very, very good time, and sometimes that's all you ask for in a book. That is all you want. I also read One of Us is Lying by Karen McManus, and this is a young adult thriller mystery book. It's set in a school where 5 children go into detention and only 4 walk out. One of them has been murdered, and the title, One of Us is Lying, implies the fact that somebody here knows something more than they are letting on. But the person who died is not a normal student. He has a gossip blog that he publishes gossip about all of the students on, and apparently he was just ready to post something about each of these students who are in detention with him, so they all have motive to kill him. This book is one of the ones that I describe as I'm here for a good time, but not for a long time. There are so many elements of this that don't add up, that I don't particularly like, and yet I raced through this book, I consumed it, and I had a lot of fun reading it, even if I think it's not the best book. So let me explain. All of these 4 students are stereotypes. We've got the jock, we've got the jock's girlfriend, we've got the goody two-shoes, and then we've got the school delinquent. So they're all fulfilling these stereotypes, and then you find out they've got a bit more to them than these stereotypes present. And I kind of liked these characters. I had a very good time getting to know them, and there were 2 characters in this book that I particularly shipped together. And you know me, when I have a ship, I'm soft for a book. So I had a good time just reading it and seeing if my ship would work out. So I was wondering who done it, and I did figure it out. I did manage to figure out who done it and how done it, which was a bit of a disappointing plot twist. I did not want the twist that I predicted, and that was the twist that I got. It's fine, I'm just not very satisfied with it. I also don't feel like it delved into it enough and unpacked it enough for what it was, so I would have liked more of the aftermath. And even when the whole climactic moment was happening, it didn't feel that exciting. It felt a bit underwhelming because the build to it was quite great. I also think that the forming or the structure that creates the story doesn't really make sense. If there was a gossip blog like the one that exists in this book, the teachers in the school would definitely have done something about it. This book keeps talking about how the teachers couldn't do anything about the gossip blog. That is not true. I've seen in multiple schools that they have done things with this kind of situation. But regardless of all of that, just accepting it as it is a fun book. It is a good time. Will I read more of this author? Yes, because I can just feel like it'd be something easy to breeze through and fun, even if it's not got the most depth to it, even if it's not the best quality. Sometimes you can just eat up books just like this one. So you can see that I've been reading books with horror and murder and dark themes, and this one is no different. I read Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by LaRocca, and this is a collection of 2 novellas and 1 short story, and they are all horror short stories. I liked each and every single one of them. In my vlog, I go into more detail about what I thought of each particular story, but what I will say here is the first one and the last one are my favorites. And just to give you quick summaries of what the stories are about, I would say the first one is about an online relationship that kind of spirals and gets very dark and manipulative. The second one is a story that has to do with an isolated setting and what if it was proven that the afterworld or life after death does not exist. What impact does that have on religious people and what they believe? And then last but not least, the last story is about horror to do with societal norms and political correctness. And they were all fantastic and they were all fascinating and they were all deliciously dark. I savoured them. I love LaRocca's writing. I loved their use of imagery, particularly in the second one. And I loved the way that it slowly just built up all of them, the suspense and the spiral into descent of madness. Really, really well done. I cannot wait to read more by LaRocca. I finished off a series, Who Am I? So I read Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor, and this is the sequel to Strange the Dreamer. So I can't really tell you what this one is about, but in Strange the Dreamer we meet Laszlo Strange, who really is fascinated by the city of Weep, which is kind of a fairy tale mythological city that no one believes really exists, when one day someone shows up who is clearly from Weep and speaking the language from Weep, and he says he needs people's help for people to come and volunteer to come and save his city. And so that is how the first book starts. It's a fantasy series, and I just felt okay about the series overall, and particularly just feeling okay about this book. And this is one of the books where if I could take the concept and rewrite it and change a whole load of things, I would have, and I would have enjoyed it more. But for what this book is, I cannot fault it. It's still a continuation of the first book. It's a solid continuation. It picks up right where the other one ended. I think it's got less of that lyrical, beautiful purple writing that is very vivid in the first one. So this writing just feels a bit more straightforward and not as beautifully written. It kind of doesn't follow some of the secondary characters we're really close to in the first one because of the progression of the story, and I was actually interested in seeing more of those secondary characters and felt a bit disappointed that we kind of ditched them and left them behind. I did think the storyline did one of the tropes that I don't really like when it comes to a villain, of bringing in another villain and then that kind of dynamic and introduction framing the narrative that was started in the first book, and I just felt like it was a bit of a cop-out, and I don't know, I just wanted a lot more from this book than what we got. But it still did some very interesting things with the magic and the way that gifts work in this book, and I really liked seeing the addition that she built to the world building she had in the first book. I think that was done particularly well, and I think the characters were consistent, I think the writing was consistent, everything was just consistent. But consistency to me kind of lends to a mediocre read rather than bringing something new to the table, rather than making me excited. And I thought because of the way that the first one ended, if I continued, I would get something more, something greater, because we'd move away from that insta-love territory that dominated the first one. And while the insta-love is still present in this one, it's more a factor for reasons why characters do something than its own plot point. So overall, this one was just a mixed bag, and I just don't think it's a series for me. But I'm glad I gave it a shot. I gave it a fair try. They're long books, so definitely a fair try. And yeah, Moving on to bigger and better. I read, at long last, Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, and this is a book that I've been meaning to read for ages. I love a good Gothic fiction book, and this just sounded perfect. So if I would have to summarize this one, I would say it's about a girl who gets a message from her cousin. Her cousin is newly married, and they moved out to this house that's kind of in the middle of nowhere in a very rural town, and the message is saying, please help me, I need some help, I'm not okay. And so this cousin gets sent to this isolated manor to see what is happening, and everything is not all right, and there is something more sinister than it seems. I've described this book as Gothic as I've been talking about it, but I would like to clarify that this is very much a Gothic horror book. So if you don't like horror and you don't like body gore, this might not be one for you, but it does first and foremost do that Gothic element all the way through it. This is a book that is slow and steadily building to something that is going to be a big moment, and your understanding gradually gets there until it's all revealed, and then you're just in and strapped in for the ride, and you get to go where the plot is taking you. I really like this. I had a very good time with the main character. She's not a perfect main character by any means, but you start to feel for her, you start to want the best for her, you start to hope she's okay. I loved the insidiously dark feeling and vibe and atmosphere that this book built around a house that seems a bit sentient, seems like its own character in its own right, and just like something is clearly not right here. I love that. I love that setting any day. The family and the situation was a bit bizarre, but there is a use of metaphor here to talk about some of the larger topics, and I quite liked that. I also really liked the female agency that was given. I do think in the beginning it was lacking it a bit, and when it came to the big plot drop, as I've been calling it, I think there was a lot of tell versus show, and tell versus the female character having the agency to figure things out. But after that plot drop moment, after everything gets explained to you, those female characters own it and take hold of their own destiny in the book, which was very nice to see. I'm definitely trying to talk around some of the plot elements because I don't want to give the game away by any means, but I had a very, very good time with this book. It's literally everything I like in a Gothic horror wrapped up in one, with a beautiful cover, so it's no wonder that I gave it 5 stars, and this became a new favourite for me as well. Oh, we have to talk about A Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin, one of the books I've been currently reading for the longest period of time in my life, and this is the second book in the Game of Thrones series. If I had to describe the first book, I always do it as the title. There is one throne, there are many families, and it's a game to see who can sit on the throne. And this one continues it. If you want to read the title of it, A Clash of Kings, it's a big hint to what's going on in this book. And overall, I liked it, but I didn't love it as much as the first book in the series. I think the first book in the series did the political intrigue very well. It had characters that I really cared about, and every single point of view felt enticing and exciting and gripping. Whereas this one, 50% of this could definitely have been cut out. It's much longer than the first book, even though the first book is a long one to start with. I think there were some point of views that I really didn't care about, and so I just was not happy when we got to their chapters and I'd have to read 50 pages of a point of view that I just was not interested in. And even then, some of the characters that I used to be interested in just had storylines that went nowhere, and I can see that they were dragging this storyline across because it's going to be important in the later books, but it's not relevant in this book, and I wish we just didn't have their point of view throughout the duration of this book, rather than have it be so boring that I've lost interest in some characters that used to be my favourite characters. That said, I did still have some characters that I really cared about. I do still love the fact that this author will kill off characters with no forewarning and kind of no pre-planning, so it always keeps you on your toes to what is happening. There's a big war that is going on in multiple places in this book, which means any character is up for grabs. You can see people betraying people, and there's political intrigue in there. I was less interested in the actual war scenes that we got to read. I think he's not the best at describing fighting in an enticing way, but everything else was really well described and more intriguing to me and interesting. And by the end of this book, the last 200 pages or so, I was racing through to get to the end. It was suspenseful. I wanted to know what was happening. I wanted to know who would win, what fight, who would end up on top. It was everything in the end there. I just wish that it had some of that addictiveness all the way through this long tome. So I'm going to give it until the next book, and the next book will be my deciding factor about whether or not I'm going to continue this series or just watch the TV series instead. But even though this was not the best time, it was not by no means a bad time. I feel like I'm saying by no means a lot. I also briefly want to mention that the representation of women in this is absolutely rubbish, and also it's heavily laced with ableism, so do be aware of those things when you're going in. Then I read Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica, and this is a translated horror book, and it's dealing with the concept of the fact that you cannot eat animals anymore. They say that there's a massive virus, and if you eat animal meat you'll go crazy and die, but because people wanted meat so badly, they have turned towards manufacturing and breeding humans for people to eat. That is what this book is about, and it is very, very intense. I don't often feel horrified by the horror books that I'm reading, by the horror films that I'm watching, but this had me feeling queasy. The way it describes the breeding of humans, the treatment of humans as a commercial product to be eaten, it was just absolutely disgusting. There's no other word for it other than disgusting. And what makes it all the more sickening is that, of course, you're making the mental connection to the fact that we eat animals and we treat animals that way. It's just made all the more apparent by the fact that it's being done on humans. I really liked the way the author just used what we do in real life and what she's done in this book. I just like the way she drew those connections without being on the nose about it at all. It just linked very well. I also think she did a good job of pacing out the horror that she brings into it. I get horrified, I then get normalized and attuned to the horror in a very weird and disturbing way, and then she brings in another factor, so I stay horrified the whole way through. It was very well balanced and very well structured in that way. I also like the way that she talks about language and how our language around food and consumption and people really changes what we normalize and what we say is okay and what isn't okay, and where we draw the line. I think that was very smart. It was very good commentary. Basically, this book is just genius and well written and so well done. As for the plot, it's one of those books that kind of feels like a classic. I kept comparing it to 1984 while I was reading it, because it's one of the ones where not too much happens, but you see the steady progression of the characters' development, and you get a steady engagement into the world and into the commentary, that you don't really care about what is happening plot-wise. It's more so for you to think about these concepts, to think about this character, and to think about the ending. Kind of take what you want from that. So all in all, it was very, very good. It messed me up real bad, and I really, really recommend if you can take this level of body gore. I read Mina and the Undead by Amy McCaw, and this is a very fun young adult horror book that feels very contemporary. It's about Mina, and she is going to spend some time with her sister who she hasn't seen in ages. Their mother went missing a long time ago, and her sister works in this house of horrors kind of museum that she's very much looking forward to being part of, because she loves horror films, she loves the horror culture, she is all about it. But when a series of murders starts to happen in town in a way that mimics some of the horror lore and mythology and films and things like that, Mina is going to try and figure out who is doing it, because it looks like her sister may have been framed. This book is the epitome of horror fun. If you want to read horror but you don't want too much body gore and you just want to have a good time and you want some vampires in your life, this is the book that I would recommend you read. I just had such a good time with it. I flew through it. I enjoyed getting to meet these characters. I think the characters and the friendship group at the core of this were just very well done, very well developed. There's a romantic relationship which kind of takes a back seat in this book, but I also really want to say I appreciated that the couple got together relatively fast. So rather than, you know, getting them together at the end, you got to see them get together and kind of work on this case and work on solving it as best they could together. It does do this thing where it balances the supernatural and the real life grounded mystery element. So you're trying to figure out the murders, you're trying to figure out the mystery, and all of that's done in a realistic way. But as the title suggests, vampires are also included. And I liked getting to see the vampire laws that are mentioned and the way it's explained in this book. I liked these vampires a lot. I also really liked that there's a few references to horror films and horror books, and as someone who loves horror myself, I was able to like pick out the ones that I've seen and the ones that I understand the references to, and it's just a very, very good time. But at the same time, none of those references are too overwhelming or too in your face. If you're not familiar with horror, you won't be, you know, inundated with these shout outs, and you can just read them and skim through. All in all, just such a good time, and I'm really looking forward to the sequel, but this is a complete story within itself. It doesn't feel like a prologue. It is such a good beginning to a series. I unfortunately read The Other Black Girl by Dalila Harris, and this is a thriller written by a black author. You don't see too many of those in my opinion, and so whenever I see one I kind of want to read it. I was especially drawn to this one because it's set in a publishing house. If you didn't know, I work in publishing, which is why I wanted to read this, and it's about being the only black girl in the office, and then another black girl gets hired and she starts to receive threats about leaving her job and about herself. And so begins this story. I did not like it. It's by a black author, but it's one of these books that I feel like is written and catered towards a very specific audience, which is not black people. It is full of the stereotypes around black American culture that you see. We get to see characters who are reaching across tables to grab hot sauce because they like it, and characters who are woke, but it's kind of a fake element of woke. By the way, that is never addressed. They never call her out for this fake wokeness that she seems to embody and live her life by. It's also got this whole scene that I really didn't like with black hair cream and just how you identify black women and things like that. It's just full of stereotypes, and I just did not like it. I also don't believe that black characters talk about the topics that she and her friend talk about all the time as if it's their only defining personality trait. Is not the case. But all of that put to the side, I also did not like the actual plot. There is the main character's storyline, and then there's a storyline that's told from alternating points of view, and that alternating point of view is used as a crutch to support the whole storyline. And though it's not following our main character and it's not following the main storyline, everything gets worked out in a secondary storyline that feels like it takes a back seat, and it just felt a bit lazy that our main character lacked a lot of agency, didn't really catch clues or discover things herself, because we actually see that all through the secondary storyline. I did not like the ending. I thought the plot twist was ridiculous. I didn't think it made any sense. It was out of the left field, and if you're going to have a plot twist in a thriller that is grounded in reality, don't do this. Don't do what this book did, because it makes no sense. It was trying to also include a rushed layer of commentary, which didn't really add up. That wasn't very clearly explained or clear cut, so you can interpret it in different ways, some of which are harmful ways, some of which are maybe attempting to be positive commentary, but because it's not properly done, it just feels very slapdash, it feels a bit reckless, and it just didn't add up. I finished this book and I thought, what was this? What was this? And then I also read Woman Eating by Kohda. It's a literary fiction book with a vampire as a main character. Our vampire is Japanese, Malaysian, British, so she's got all those cultures within her. She's kind of at this, you know, past teenagerhood, ready to become an adult age, but she's just kind of stretching out her wings. She's a vampire and she craves eating food and the rich foods, but at the same time she also craves the blood, and her mum has always been the one who provides blood for her, who looks after her, but she's recently put her mum in a home, and now she's got to take care of herself and make her own way and make her own rules. And it was a very interesting combination, because it feels like a new adult kind of book where you're newly an adult and you're ready to take on the world, but lo and behold, you're a vampire, so what can you really do? And if you don't have to abide by your mother's rules and diet, what will your choices be, and why will they be those choices? And so I was very excited to get into this one, because that concept sounded very interesting, and I love books that focus on identity. And I will say that's one of the best things that this book did, was all of the questions around her cultural heritage and her vampiric heritage, and how that combined and meshed and didn't combine as well. But I do overall feel very disappointed in this book, because while it was short and easy to read, I don't really think it did anything. I don't have very strong opinions. There was nothing I can say that it did badly, but there was nothing I can say that it did particularly well, other than looking into the identity theme, because it just felt like a bit of a nothing story to me, and I don't really have much more to say. It was a book I read it, I didn't really feel anything. I actually even had trouble concentrating on the book actively as I was reading it, which is very strange because I was a multi-reader. I was reading other things at the same time and had no issue getting immersed in those books. It was literally just this one, and I think that puts it at the fault of the writing and the story rather than me and my mood. And so I don't really have much more to say. I just think this book had a very interesting concept. I enjoyed it being within this genre. I think it'd be interesting to see vampires within this genre more, but I just think it could have capitalized on its concept and just done a bit more with it. This month I also read Beautiful Broken Things by Sara Barnard. This is a young adult book that is following these two friends who are very, very close. They've got an incredibly tight friendship and they've literally not been apart. And then a new girl starts at school and she worms her way into the friendship, and now it's a three-way friendship. But this girl has some trauma that she's working through and is a bit of a mess emotionally, and it's about the ways in which it affects their friendship, having someone new there, but also having someone new who is dealing with the aftermath of such a big event, the way that she is handling it. And this book was a 5-star, a new favourite for me, and I absolutely loved it. I think it did what it did very, very well, very, very sensitively and very, very emotionally, which is the best way to kind of handle this subject matter. There are big content warnings for this, so I'll leave those down below. Just make sure you check them out before reading it. But some of the things this book did well, all of the things really, but if I'm going to list out a few to kind of get you into reading this book, is that I think it did the friendship aspect well. This book just screams friendship. It's all about these three girls who are friends, and it's about the ways in which new friendships can throw old friendships into a bit of a weird state, but also the importance of space in friendships, the importance of closeness and understanding in friendships, and also the importance of different roles in friendship, different personalities, and how having different personalities in a friend group can actually be a very good thing, even if sometimes it doesn't feel like it. And it showed the difficulties and complexities of what it means to have a friendship group. It's not always straightforward, it's not always easy, you can't always hang out all three of you. Inevitably, someone's going to miss out on one event, someone's going to be there for another, and it's all about, it just captures all of that. It just captures all of that element of friendship so well, and there's at no point where you question how close they are. It also talks about arguments, getting through them. It just does everything about the friendship so very well. I was really, really impressed. But also I think the author handles this very intense subject matter very, very well, and reading the author's note I can clearly see why and how she's done it so well. Lots of research, a lot of really trying to make this as genuine as possible and to take on this perspective as well as possible. It's a difficult subject matter, it's emotional, it's dark, and it's very, very messy. And I think sometimes it might seem overly messy, but we have to remember we're reading about teenagers here who are not always going to make the right choices. And I also think it does a very good job with that kind of character development. In the beginning, I was a bit unsure about this book for the first 50 pages. We're introduced to our main character and she has goals for the year, such as trying to get a boyfriend and wanting to lose her virginity and things that seem very teenagery. And I was worried that this book was going to fall into that category of young adult. But don't worry, just keep on reading. By the end of it, our main character has developed a lot. She's definitely changed in personality and also what is important to her. And I just think by starting where the book started, it left so much room for growth. It left so much room for development. And even though our character might seem a bit petty in the beginning, she's not entirely petty in the beginning because you can tell that she cares. And you can see that very clearly from the way she treats her sisters and her friends, her sister and her friend. And it's just very, very well written. It was easy to read. I did go through this one quite quickly as well, and I just think it's a very, very good young adult book, and I'd recommend it. I recommend it, recommend it, recommend it. I read We Are the Brenans by Tracey Lange, and this is a book where we follow a big family, and this big family are all keeping secrets from each other, and Sunday, who is one of the members of this big family, moved away from the family over a year ago, just dropped them and nobody knew why, and she's suddenly come back after going through a car crash and is fitting her way into the family and the ways that it's changed, but they're also coming to understand what happened to her and why she left in the first place. This was a good book, but it's also not one I'm going to remember in a long time. I had a good time with it. I love a found family feel and a big family feel. And even though it is a big family, it does feel kind of found family in some ways because they all continuously choose each other, which is nice and heartwarming to see. There was a ship that I had in it, 2 characters that I shipped, and I wanted to see them get together. And as I said before, if there's a ship, I'm a bit more invested straight off the bat. So I kind of liked seeing the friendships within the family and the found family element and the big family element, but also the chaos of their lives and some of the secrets. And as one of the big secrets, the big reveals comes up, I thought I had it pegged and I was not happy with the idea I had in my head, but this book pleasantly surprised me. It was not what I thought it was, and it was something different, and that was a big surprise. And I think it handled that surprise element very well. I will say that after that, I kind of knew all the rest of the plot drops that we get in the book. I kind of figured everything else out based on that big plot twist, I will say, but it was still a very good one, and I still had a very good time reading this one. It does the element of characters masterfully. It jumps between the different characters' heads, so you really get to see how the family fit together that way, but you do get to see their independent, distinctive personalities, and I quite like that. I quite liked getting to know them. One of the big things that I didn't like about this book is that there is a disabled member in this family who has sensory issues, and it just felt like he was used as a foil for measuring how out of sync the family is, because he's someone who thrives on routine, and routine really comforts him. When the family gets a bit hectic and everything's kicking off, of course that ruins his routine, and then you can see that his development is not going so well, and then once things calm down a bit you can see that he's happy and more at ease, and it's just like he was used as a foil or like mood reader for the way that the whole family is dealing with things. He doesn't get his own point of view, so he doesn't have a voice, he doesn't have an opinion really, and he's not as involved in the main plot as all the other characters are, and I found that really, really disappointing as someone who really tries to think of themselves as someone who cares about disability representations. This one fell short in that aspect. I read Black and Female by Tsitsi Dangarembga. By the way, I don't think I mentioned this, but lots of these titles that I read by Black authors was because it was Black History Month in the UK in October. And so I wanted to read this one as well. It's a collection of essays that are very personal by the author. The author is Black and female and from Zimbabwe, which is really important to this book because a lot of the feminist and Black discussion is rooted in Zimbabwe as well as rooted in the US, so it kind of does both of those elements very well. And it talks a bit about how African Black female representation is often rooted in Nigeria and Ghana, and all the rest of the countries are forgotten, which is very, very true. And it was really nice to kind of see that highlighted. You get to learn a bit more about Zimbabwean history, and I did think that was a lot because it happens at the beginning, and it was kind of like, this is a lot of information with not much personal view or commentary to help me through it and to pace me through it. But once you get past that bit, you get a lot of insights into her own personal experience as someone who is Black and female and lived within both countries and experienced the culture of both countries, and so I found that really insightful. I really liked the personal narrative element to it, and my favourite essay of this collection was definitely the last one, where Sis just spits fact after fact and really goes off on some of the things that need to be changed, especially when it comes to also being Black and female within the film industry or within the writing and creative writing industry. Just so much truth in this book, and I learned a lot, and I think it is very worth your reading. It's also very quick, so you can just whiz through this one. And then last but not least, I'm going to be talking about Out of the Sun by Esi Edugyan, which is another essay collection. I've really left the non-fiction till the end here. And this is an essay collection with essays at the crossroads of race, and they look into ghosts and the supernatural. Superstition is actually a big part of Black culture in some countries and in some cultures. And then also it talks a lot about like Black art and Black figures in Renaissance art, which is something I hadn't learned about before reading this book. Let me just look at the contents page to kind of get a grip of. Yes, it also talks about what it's like to be Black and Black Asian history, which is just something that I have not seen enough discussion on, because yes, Black people exist outside of Africa, the UK and the US and have experiences that differ depending on where they are in the world. So it was kind of insightful to kind of see what it was like to see Black history within Asia and also contemporary, and just things like that, where I learned so much from this, and I was considering perspectives and learning about perspectives in situations that I don't really get to read about. So that was all very nice and very good. But at the same time, this wasn't structured the way that I prefer my essays to be structured. It doesn't really give much of an introduction that gives you direction to the essay that you're going to read. She immediately throws you into examples and case studies, and then at the end she tells you why it's all relevant, which kind of left me floundering and a bit confused when I was reading through the essays, because for a long time I'd be like, why am I reading this? Why am I reading this? Why am I reading this? And it was only when I get to the end that I'd be like, oh, that's why all of these examples link together. That's how it all fits into the bigger picture. And I would have liked if it had more of that togetherness in the individual essays, but also in the overall collection, because it did feel like she chose some subjects that she's really interested in, and they were all interesting subjects, and she wrote on them, but she didn't really give a cohesive collection, because this collection doesn't have an introduction or an epilogue. So I don't really see why she chose these subjects to fit into one book. But I'm kind of like that just because I've read so many essay collections at this point. So if you haven't read that many, you might just go with the flow and learn different things and not care about the cohesiveness of the whole collection. That's a bit of a picky thing for me to comment on. But there you have it. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of October. Please let me know in the comment section down below what has been your favorite recent read, a book that you read last month and really enjoyed. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!